Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10. Pre-orders are now available for War of the Spark and Modern Horizons booster boxes. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends. Today was the last day of the Mythic Invitational, and as promised, we got a lot of preview cards for War of the Spark. We're going to look at each and every card that was previewed today. And most of them came from Wizards. If anything did not come from Wizards, I will list the source in the description below as always. And also on top of that, we had a big leak occur too. I will warn you before we go to those in case you don't want to see the leaked cards because they are going to reveal some things about the story that they haven't talked about yet. So if you want the full preview, stick around for the whole video, but I'll let you know when the leaks are going to start and you can tune out at that point if you don't want to catch those. All right, without any further ado, let's get into it. Our first card I'm going to show you is actually the Buy a Box promo. So remember, you can only get this if you pre-order your box from your local game store and purchase it there while supplies last. You won't find this card in booster packs, and it will be a foil card. So, is this something I'd want to play in Standard? I don't really think so, just because we're not in the middle of an artifact block, and I'm sure they did that on purpose. It costs 6, it leans on the expensive side, but if I had a lot of good artifacts in the Standard environment, well, who knows, maybe it could be decent. Maybe we will go to an artifact plane before it rotates out, although I kind of doubt it. I do think this is amazing for Commander, though. I want to build around this card and use Microsynth Lattice and things like that, and just really find crazy combos and break it. There's some cool stuff you could do definitely in the Commander environment here. Okay, now let's get into the cards that you'll find in the set. And first they showed us this panorama this morning, and it shows Ravnica on the verge of destruction as it's being attacked by Nicol Bolas and the Eternals. And what's really cool is this panorama is the basic lands. Here's the plains. Quick look at the island. Swamp. Mountain. And forest. Now on to the other preview cards that we saw today. First, the Johnny's Pridemate. I won't spend a lot of time on this one because this actually already got leaked and it's a reprint, so you know what it does. Keep in mind, though, this does have the corrected text now that they did make the rules change recently, taking away the may. Ignite the Beacon. Okay, Esper Control players, do you hate it when you can't find your Teferis? Well, here's a card that will help you find your Teferis, but it probably can do other things too, I suppose. It's actually kind of sweet. It costs 5, which does lean on the expensive side. It is splashable, though, only 1 white. I do like that. But I love the fact that it's an instant. It is perfect for something like an Esper Control deck, I suppose. With that being said, though, what I think is really interesting about this card is you might be able to build a deck with some of the smaller Planeswalkers. We're going to be looking at Planeswalkers today that are actually uncommon and rare. Not all Planeswalkers will be mythic in this set, of course, because there's so many of them. So if you had cheaper Planeswalkers that don't necessarily, warp the game, being able to search up a couple of them for utility could be pretty interesting. I think this could see Standard play. Ravnica at War. Okay, when you're playing White Weenie and your opponent's playing Esper Control and you need to get rid of Teferi, how do you do that? Well, here's Ravnica at War. So there's probably other uses for this card as well. I have a lot of Esper Control in my mind after watching the Mythic Invitational all weekend, so bear with me. But I do think this is actually kind of a sweet card. It's not going to be for all decks, obviously, but monocolor decks might be interested in running something like this out of the sideboard. It does take care of a lot of problems that you have to deal with. But it also doesn't take care of a lot of the big problems. It's not going to help you against Goblin Chain Whirler or Arclight Phoenix or Banalish Marshal, for example. But there are a lot of good targets for this, and it only does cost 4. Flux Channeler. So yes, Proliferate is back. Makes sense in this set, of course, but there is a small tweak to it. Notice what it says here. Choose any number of permanents and or players, then give each another counter of each kind already there. That's a little different from before. Before, if there were 2 different kinds of counters on a card, you'd have to choose between one of the 2. This lets you now just go ahead and duplicate both. Interesting. It makes things a little simpler. I'll give it that. So let's talk about the card itself. Is this any good? Yeah, I think this is actually kind of sweet. And here's what I want to do with it. Think about some of these Izzet Phoenix decks we've already been seeing in the format, right? A lot of cheap spells. What if you were to play something similar, but maybe used Runaway Steamkin, for example, and then throw in your cantrip spells, and all of a sudden you could have a nice little engine there. I think you might even be able to work this into some of the modern strategies potentially too. Also in Commander, imagine playing this with Astro Cornucopia or Everflowing Chalice and those big mana decks. I think there's a lot you can find to do with this card. It's also a wizard, which is pretty nice for those cards that care about wizards. Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. You may have noticed by now that these Planeswalkers all have this like static ability, which is pretty cool. If you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game, for example, on Jace. So it has that Laboratory Maniac ability. So what do you want to do with Jace? Well, forecasting costs 3 of it on color, but we do live in the world of Ravnica and Shockland, so that might not be too difficult to do. But do you really want to do this? This is all about self-mill. You kind of want to mill yourself out of the game. Now, the +1 also mills the opponent if you choose to, so keep that in mind. It's not just one-sided where you can only mill yourself. You can mill your opponent for 2 and draw a card with that +1, or you just mill yourself for 2 and draw a card that's going to move through cards quickly. Especially in Draft or Sealed, this could actually maybe win a game in certain circumstances. That's kind of cool. So, something to think about there. Is there going to be a standard deck based around this card? Someone's going to try to make one. It might be me, and it might fail miserably. But it's going to be really fun to try, right? And who knows? Someone might be able to figure it out and surprise you with this thing. So, this is actually one of those cards where I really like the design. Don't know if we're going to see a whole lot of it in the future, but it's pretty cool that it exists. No Escape. Okay, now this is actually a decent counterspell. Hear me out on this one. It does cost 3, a blue and 2, so it is splashable. Counter target creature or planeswalker. However, it exiles the creature or planeswalker if they're targeted this way. And you get to scry 1 on top of it. That exile is very relevant, and sure, I could just keep this in my sideboard, but what I really like about it, if I decide to main deck it, and I come up against an Esper control deck, for example, it doesn't matter that there's not going to be a lot of creatures coming at me. I can use this on the Teferis, and that's actually pretty good. I like the versatility here. Relentless Advance. Okay, now this is the amass mechanic the first time we're seeing it. This particular card simply is a sorcery with amass 3. Put 3+1/+1 counters on an army you control. If you don't control one, create a 0/0 black zombie army creature token first. Now, the way the mechanic works, if you have a card that tells you can amass, if you already have a zombie army token in play, you just put that many +1/+1 counters on your token. If you don't, you create a token and you put that many +1/+1 counters on your token. You can't choose to go wide, though. If you already have one of those in play, you can't go and create another one. You have to put the amass counters on the old one. On its own, I'm not crazy about it. I don't like tall tokens because they're just too easy to get rid of. Now, if I'm using cards that have amass stapled onto them, then it's a nice little bonus maybe, and we'll look at some other cards later that are like that. This one, though, is probably the worst card we're going to look at today, honestly, just because it just creates a token hill giant basically for 4. That just doesn't feel really good to me. And granted, if I'm all in on amass and Draft or Sealed, maybe I might play this card, but I feel like you might just have better stuff just generally. So you'll find this mechanic in Grixis colors. We'll see more of it in a moment. Bolas's Citadel. Okay, this is a crazy one too. 3 black and 3, so again, maybe not the end of the world in this current environment, but it is devoted to black pretty strongly. Legendary artifact, and this is pretty crazy. You can play stuff off the top of your deck, but you have to pay life to do it. So it kind of feels a little bit like Experimental Frenzy. There's also the ability at the bottom where you can tap, sacrifice 10 non-land permanents, and each opponent loses 10 life. I think this is most interesting in Commander. I'd like to try this out with like Sensei's Divining Top and Aetherflux Reservoir. Standard, I don't know. It feels a little bit difficult to pull off, but again, we haven't seen all the cards in the set. And you never know, sometimes people make some cool brews. Dreadhorde Invasion. Okay, here's another card that's going to use that amass mechanic. Now, this one's actually pretty interesting. It's real cheap, a black and 1. It reminds me a lot of Bitter Blossom. It's obviously not as good as Bitter Blossom. This feels like a fixed Bitter Blossom to me. I can't go wide again, I can only go tall, but I am getting +1/+1 on the battlefield every turn. I lose a life to do that, but you know what? Over time, it's just persistent. And even though it's a big ground pounder I'm making, could be relevant. Also, if my token gets large enough, or if I have other large zombie tokens, they could attack in with lifelink and that would make up for the life loss. In that case, not bad for 2 mana. This is one that might see some play in Standard. I would definitely keep an eye on it. I think this is going to be a tough to beat card in Draft or Sealed too. Herald of the Dreadhorde. Pretty good limited card here because you get a 3/2 for 4, and when it dies, you get another 2/2. So it is very persistent. For the cost, I actually like what you're getting here economy-wise. And if you have other amass cards, this could complement those well. Liliana, Dreadhorde General. This is one of the mythic rare planeswalkers. Feels weird that I have to say that, but she is one of them. And again, you have a pretty good ability here. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. Yeah, that alone makes me want to play this with Teysa Karlov. So the biggest strike against her, I think, is her casting cost. 6 is not unmanageable in the world of Standard. We've seen many 6 casting cost planeswalkers do just fine. but it is a little harder to break through, especially as the environment is getting more and more cluttered with cards. So can she get there? I think it just depends on what else is going on in this set, and if somebody can make a brew that's more efficient than the other things out there. If you can create a zombie deck, or maybe an aristocrat style deck with this card in it at the top of the curve, it might see some standard play. There's a lot of power here. I mean, 6 loyalty for the 6 mana, that's awesome. The first ability is great. The +1 making a zombie token is pretty good, and the minus abilities are decent as well. So she's definitely one to keep an eye on. If she doesn't make it in standard, she'll always have home in Taste of Karlov decks and Commander, I'm sure, as well as zombie tribal builds. Omnixilis, the Hate Twisted. I actually like this one a lot. It costs 5, so again, it's kind of on that fringe of being a little expensive for standard, but you get some good stuff here. 5 loyalty, and the -2 will destroy target creature. Its controller draws 2 cards. I like the versatility here. I could go ahead and destroy one of my opponent's creatures if I need to. They draw 2 cards, but they also take 2 damage. I don't like making my opponent draw cards, though, even if it is damaging them. That's not great. But on the flip side, I can go ahead and destroy one of my creatures, maybe some token or something that I don't need anymore, and then I can draw 2 cards. The versatility is pretty sweet there. On top of that, imagine putting this out against a deck that's going to draw a lot of cards like Esper Control. This really disrupts their game plan for 5 mana. It might be more of a sideboard card for like a Rakdos midrange deck or something like that in the future, but I do think it could see some standard play. Omnixilis' Cruelty. This is a pretty sweet common, actually. This feels like a real strong common for limited. 3 casting cost instant, giving -5/-5 so it can get past indestructible. And also, if the creature dies, it gets exiled instead. Sign me up. I'll play this in standard. I'll play this in draft or sealed. I might even consider playing this in modern. Fresquez Finisher. This feels like a pretty decent limited card for me. I'm usually not a big fan of the 3/2s for 3 because they do trade down, but I like the ability here. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls that was dealt damage this turn. I like the versatility. It can take out a creature or planeswalker depending on the situation. Yeah, I'd be happy to draft this in a pack, I think. Tybalt's Rakish Instigator. Here he is. Is he good? Well, I don't think he's bad. I like that first ability. Your opponents can't gain life. If I'm in a mono red build and my opponent's playing like Esper Control or something like that and they're gaining life with absorbs and such, you know what? I might want to side in old Tybalt here. I don't think his minus ability is all that exciting, but it is something extra you can do. He might see some sideboard play. Tybalt's Rager, another good limited card here. I like cards like this where you can pump the power. It doesn't pump toughness, but it's a red card. What do you expect? Also, if it dies, it deals 1 damage to any target. It will work well with Spectacle. I don't know. It only costs 2. It does feel like maybe a stretch to say this could show up in a Rakdos aggro deck of some kind in standard, but in limited, I'll be happy to play it most of the time. Arlen, Voice of the Pack. Well, we wanted a good Wolf Lord of some kind, and she is a good Wolf Lord. I will definitely give her that. She comes in with a ton of loyalty. 7 loyalty, 6 casting cost. She can make wolf tokens. Whenever you get a wolf or werewolf, it gets a +1/+1 counter when it enters the battlefield. That's actually kind of sweet for commander purposes for tribal. Don't really see how this is relevant in standard currently, but I'm kind of glad they made this card. I think it could be fun. Arlens Wolf. This is actually pretty sweet because a 3/2 for 3, you know how I feel about those, but can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So it's a lot harder to make it trade down. That actually makes me feel like I would be more than happy to play this in draft or sealeds any day. Paradise Druid. Okay, this one is actually kind of sweet. As long as it's not tapped, it has hexproof. Great for mana dorks, because what's the biggest fear when you put out a mana dork? That it's going to get shocked, right? So the old phrase, bolt the bird from back in the day. That's what you do when you see a Llanowar Elf, right? You try to get rid of it. Well, at least you're going to be able to get 1 tap out of this most likely. 2/1 for 2, taps for any color mana, hexproof when it's not tapped. Wonderful. Now, it's not perfect. It still dies the Goblin Chain Whirler. That is definitely an issue out there. And it does cost 2 as opposed to a Llanowar Elf that's only going to cost 1. So is it the perfect card? Maybe not, but I do think it could make its way into some stompy decks. Maybe out of the sideboard if you're dealing with direct damage, although I can't think of a lot of situations where you'd be getting hit with shock but not Chain Whirler. So I don't know. We'll see how this one plays out, but I do think it's actually pretty solid. Ajani the Great-Hearted. This is a great flavor card because Ajani cares about everybody else. Ajani's going to let you gain life. He's going to give your creatures vigilance and +1/+1 counters. Planeswalkers get loyalty. I kind of want to try this out in like this Selesnya Tokens deck for standard. I think it might actually see play there. And in Commander, there's a lot of strategies that would appreciate this. Invade the city. Okay, here's another amass card, but this one cares about how many instants and sorceries you have in your graveyard. It is sorcery speed, but it only costs 3. And early on, this won't be a great play, of course, but later on in the game, if you do have enough instants and sorceries, and in these colors you very well may, you could create a pretty large creature. That large creature won't have evasion, though. It's going to be a big, dumb ground pounder. That's not great. But if you're playing a control deck and you need a win condition and you can control the ground, I don't know. Jeskai Control, something like that, might want to at least try this card out. It also might be able to complement Phoenix or Drake strategies. I guess if someone could figure out the 1,000-Year Storm Brew, this might actually fit in there. Might be a long shot, but I think it's worth testing. Time Wipe. Okay, here's your Azorius color board sweep, and it costs 5, and you got 2 white and a blue. Again, not too big of a deal in this environment. But here's what's interesting. You get to return a creature you control to your hand and then destroy everything else. So this does open up some different avenues for Azorius or various control builds. So in those decks, you don't always play creatures, but if there's good creatures out there with perhaps some strong enters and leaves the battlefield effects that could play well with this, who knows? It might be worth adjusting those decks a little bit for a little more power. And maybe if Teferi Hate is coming, and it feels like this set is bringing us some Teferi Hate, those decks might need to think about other win conditions. This is one to watch. Widespread Brutality. This is brutal. Forecasting cost, again, you got the color combination here, but in this environment, I'm not too worried about that. Even if I don't have any other amass going on, I get a 2/2 creature and do 2 damage to everything else. That's actually pretty good for 4 mana. And if I do happen to use other amass cards, it could be even bigger at times. Now, it won't do anything to your opponent's armies, remember, but this could crush some small strategies. And I might want to try this in a Rakdos midrange deck or something along those lines. Even if it's out of the sideboard, I do think it will see some standard play. Vraska Swarms Eminence. Okay, this one is maybe a little less exciting, but it only does cost 4. Here's what's cool about it, though. Like in Limited, when you get those Death Touch creatures, it makes them that much more deadly. You're getting 5 loyalty here, so that's pretty good to start with. It makes your opponent's decisions around these Death Touch attackers a little more difficult, because if they do just take the damage to protect their board state, the creature's going to get bigger. That -2 does give you a way to deal with Planeswalkers, but it is a very slow way. I don't really see this crossing over into Standard, I don't think, but I would be happy to play this with some Death Touch creatures for sure in Drafter Sealed. Emergent Zone. Okay, do you want to play your spells on other people's turns? Well, this is the card for you. This might not be for every Commander deck, but I do think there are some Commander decks that will really appreciate this. Basically, look at it this way. You pay 1, tap and sacrifice this thing, and you get to take your turn on someone else's turn. That actually could be kind of cool, so I do think it does have a spot there. Could this do anything as Standard, other than looking menacing sitting on the battlefield? I don't know. I think it takes a very specific situation for it to be good, but we have a lot more cards to see. Maybe there'll be some tools that make this even better. InterPlanar Beacon. You know, if there is a Super Friends build in Standard, which there could very well be, then this might see a little play. It's possible. This will be great in Commander if you need to fix colors and have a lot of Planeswalkers in your deck. Okay, so this was our last card from the actual previews today. The rest of the cards we're going to look at in this video are leaks, so if you want to avoid the leaks, I'll say goodbye to you now. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us. But if you want to stick around, here we go. Okay, so 11 leaks to look at here. They were all the size of a postage stamp because, you know, whenever there's a leak, it's never clear. It looks like Bigfoot or Loch Ness Monster, so that's basically what we had to deal with here. Now, these leaks got passed around social media today, and I usually say be careful with leaks. You never know if they're real for sure. But I will tell you, there was a card that was leaked in this group that was later revealed by Wizards. That was the Jace, and it was dead on. So it does appear that these are for real. I worked really hard to try to figure out what these things say. Hopefully I got it for the most part, but some of it was hard to read, so I did the best that I could. Here's Gideon Blackblade. We know this is going to be a mythic rare because Mark Rosewater told us, but the photograph we got is actually an extended art version of the card, so it does appear, surprise, surprise, there's going to be another mythic product coming. So this is actually a really good card. 2 white and 1. Look at the first ability. As long as it's your turn, this is a 4/4 human soldier with indestructible that's still a planeswalker. And you get to prevent any damage that would be dealt to it during your turn. So this is a 4/4 indestructible card that's going to be really hard to deal with for 3 mana. Yeah, that's kind of amazing, even if you don't read anything else. Granted, he can't block, but I'm okay with that. White Weenie decks will appreciate that. You get something that's still pretty cheap yet sizable entering the battlefield. And look at these other abilities. The +1 will help you to continue to stay aggressive. The -6 will help you deal with a target non-land permanent that you can't deal with otherwise, and it exiles it. That's awesome. So I do think this card is on the way to see standard play, maybe even modern and legacy play. It's that good. Karn, the Great Creator. I like this one a lot too. Costs 4 or 5 loyalty. Look at that -2. You may choose an artifact card you own from outside the game or an exile, reveal that card, put it into your hand. If you want to grab a Sorcerer Spyglass like in the middle of the game, you could just go ahead and do that with this card. I think that alone can make it standard playable. We're not in a big artifact standard environment, but every once in a while the other abilities might come in handy. But with that -2, I do think it will see play going forward, and in Commander, for example, there's a ton you could do with this card. It'd be great there. That first effect could be useful coming out of sideboards to host some artifact strategies in various formats too. Chandrafire Artisan, good card. It keeps the pressure on and also lets you see more cards. Perfect if I'm in an aggressive build. I think the forecasting cost is very reasonable. I could see myself running this in mono red or Rakdos aggro. I do think this does get there for standard. Nissa, Who Shakes the World. This one feels a little more commander-centric to me. Especially right now, a lot of those big mana commander decks are popular. A lot of green decks are popular right now in commander, or at least partially running green. This might just fit into some of those builds. Being able to get the extra mana is pretty awesome. And then on top of that, being able to take your lands, turn them into threats. That could be good at times. And that -8, if you can get there, could be really sweet in commander if you're in mono green. Domri, Anarch of Bolas. Alright, this is a card that I could see myself playing in some Gruul decks in standard, whether it's aggro or mid-range. The creatures you control get +1/+0, very good for those builds. Also, being able to ramp out a little bit and get around counter magic, that could be very relevant. And that -2 could be very strong as well if you have a creature-heavy deck. Nicol Bolas, Dragon God. Okay, it costs 5, 3 different colors, but in this environment, that is okay. I think you could cast this in a lot of Grixis decks. As a matter of fact, I'm thinking maybe Grixis Control could be a threat because of a card like this. The biggest downside for me is only 4 loyalty. You're going through a lot for 4 loyalty. There might be a lot of ways to get rid of this. But if it can survive, it's pretty interesting. Now, that first ability, maybe it's good, maybe it's not. Depends on the board state. It gets loyalty abilities from all other planeswalkers on the battlefield. If you're playing Super Friends, maybe you can set that up sometimes, but I wouldn't rely on that. The +1, you draw a card, each opponent exiles a card from their hand or permanent they control. That's pretty good because, again, if you can control the board, playing Grixis Control, for example, that could eventually be backbreaking. The -2 can take pressure off you, and it has versatility. The -8 might not always be relevant, but in a good control deck, again, it could be a win condition. I think there might be some brews around this. We'll have to see if they are as efficient as the other control builds. That's the trick. It's got to be better than the ones that already exist, but I do think there is potential there. I should point out, too, this is another one of the mythic planeswalkers. Niv Mizzet Reborn. This one's not a planeswalker, but it is a mythic. It costs 1 of each color, which, again, color is flexible now in standard, but this doesn't really feel like a standard card to me. It feels more like a commander card for dragon builds. Could be pretty good there. 6/6 with flying, and you do have the potential to dig a little deeper into your deck, and of course, if you have a lot of multicolor spells, you're going to be able to grab a lot more cards. And that's where this really shines. Maybe there will be a 5-color Super Friends deck in standard, and if that's the case, who knows, maybe this does see play. But this will definitely always have a home in casual Dragon Tribal. Ral Storm Conduit. Wow, that 1,000-year storm. They really want to make it happen, huh? This card is not bad, though, regardless. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, then this will deal 1 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. That can definitely add up. Again, we have already seen these decks that might appreciate this card. You're playing all these cantrips, you're playing all these cheap spells. Why not throw a Ral in there and see what happens, right? This could work in those Drake decks. It could work in those Phoenix decks. Also, +2 Scry 1. That sure isn't bad. And the -2 definitely could be relevant as well. And you can do that right out of the gate, which is pretty cool. Rorlesk Apex Hybrid. Another mythic creature here. This does bring a lot of power and toughness to the battlefield as long as you have another creature. For what you're paying here, you're getting yourself 6-7 power toughness on the battlefield. That's actually pretty good. However, I gotta ask myself, in a world where Hydroid Krasis exists, am I really gonna play this in standard? It does have flying and trample, much like our friend the Krasis, but Krasis has the card draw ability and life gain. This card is a little more dependent on board state for its abilities to be good. Now, there may be some builds that care about the proliferate, but that can be shut off with an exile effect. I do think in the absence of Krasis, this could be a good card in standard, but as it stands now, I don't really know if it gets there. Sorin Vengeful Bloodlord, looks like he does get out of the rock after all. Giving all your creatures and planeswalkers lifelink on your turn, that's actually not that bad. There's a lot of decks that might appreciate that. Again, another card that hates out those aggro strategies that are very good right now. That alone could allow this to see play even if it is out of sideboards. The +2 is not that interesting, but it is a +2. You never want to discount that. And then it does lead to hopefully a big -X at some point later in the game, taking something back from your graveyard, putting it directly into play. So it does open up the possibility of maybe being able to create a reanimation strategy and make that work. We have had other cards in the standard format that just didn't quite get that strategy there. Do I think this card's going to take that strategy and push it over the top? Probably not, but as long as there are aggro decks out there that are successful, this will always be an option. Teferi Time Reveler. If you want to mess with a control deck, this is a cheap way to do so. 3 casting cost, 4 loyalty. I could see this as a sideboard card to deal with things like Esper Control. It does really slow down their game plan. Each opponent can cast spells only any time they could cast a sorcery. The +1 could be relevant at times. The -3 is very versatile. It lets you draw cards, so you know I'm on board there. It does bring Teferi close to death out of the gate, but if you're drawing a card and bouncing something, whether it's an opponent's thing you need to bounce or something of yours that you want to bounce for a particular reason, then, yeah, you know what? It might be worth your time. Again, I think this does see sideboard play in Standard. Alright, those are the preview cards for today. We're going to come back tomorrow and talk about everything that gets revealed over the next 24 hours or so. But until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.